Firstly, thank you very much. The first station for you today, but I hope you can have a bit of fun here today as well. My name's Dan Humphries, and we're going to be talking a bit about fertility today. So I mentioned in terms of like fertility is an end result, it's a lag measure. Basically, I scan a lot of cows. I'm a dairy vet at home. We've got a vet practice at home. And I don't really offer my clients any real value other than reading out the results of what we've already done and achieved or not. By the time we're telling whether a cow's pregnant or not, those boats have sailed. If I'm telling people they've got cystic cows, I'm not going to we can do a bit to try and manage that situation, but we really need to start working towards the tap end of the situation. What's causing those cysts early? If you think a cyst in a cow adds 60 days open on average. So if you're scanning a cystic cow at 60 days, great. It's too late. It's too late. Too often when we see all these articles about, oh, this is what you need to improve your fertility, it doesn't actually address the root cause of where our problems are. One of the sayings I hate the most that we hear a hell of a lot is that don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. Because if you don't actually know what your problem is, you're never going to implement the right solution. Too many of the things that are sold to you are sold as solutions to problems you don't know whether you've got or not. All the tech and equipment is, here's a solution for you. It's 70 grand. You don't know whether you need it. The reason why we probably don't move far enough forward with all this technological advancement is the fact we aren't actually using it to address a specific issue. Almost all of fertility issues, aside from AI, technique and things like that and timing, actually are outside the sphere of fertility. So what are the factors? I'm going to ask questions here. So what are the factors that actually will give you good fertility? Or compromise your fertility? What are the big factors that are going to make the big differences? Nutrition. Yeah, nutrition is an absolutely key one. If you're trying to serve cows that are in poor body condition score or not having their needs met, then good luck. You can do all the sync programs in the world. It's not going to get you where you need to. If your nutrition's leading you to have cystic cows when you're trying to serve them, good luck. Happy hunting. All the hormones in the bottles and stuff, not getting you where you need to get to. You have to address that thing. In reality, rationing cows isn't particularly complicated. We can work out pretty accurately what they need. I do a lot of work on farms in the UK, in Ireland, in Europe and further afield, and by far and away more commonly, we've got a good diet and spec on paper, we don't get it into the cows. What are some of the reasons why we're not getting it into the cows? Feed space. Feed space is compromised on almost all of the farms I go to. If you guys ran a factory and employed, which is effectively what we're doing, we're employing cows to turn feedstuffs into milk, and what you had was a small parts bin that people had to go up to get stuff before they could transform it into another part, and you saw people queuing at that bin as a factory owner, the first thing you'd do is like, Jesus Christ, I need more bin space. If my workers are just queuing and waiting, or competing. Like this gentleman's not on top form today because yesterday him and I had a fight at the parts bin. When if the parts bin had been bigger, we wouldn't have had to have that fight. The new entrants, the first lactation animals. Do you know what? I'm not going to bother with that thing. So there's an interesting bit, and one thing we often don't consider in nutrition is cow behaviour. Cow behaviour and the desire to eat is really important to manage and to measure. So cows will go through a lot of stress to eat what they need to stop them being absolutely starving. They will really work hard. So if you can measure the stress that a cow will put a feed barrier, the strain on it, and to cause physical damage, they have to put 200 pounds of force through their skin. Cows will put 600 pounds of force to reach food that's far enough away, so 3 times the threshold to cause damage. That's how much desire they've got to eat. But that's only to get them to a certain point where they're not really going to starve to death. Every other bit of performance on a dairy farm comes from getting cows to eat voluntarily. To actually go, oh, do you know what, I'm going to do that. Again, if I'm a little bit hungry, I'm thinking, oh, I could have a bit more to eat, but I have to fight through all you lot to get to the other side. I'm probably just going to go and stand here for a bit. That scone isn't worth it for me. However, if it's easy, it's nicely presented, it's palatable, it makes a real big difference. The other big one in that is water. Water is ridiculous. We're always looking for those things. This gives me 1% more, 10% or a kilo more dry matter intake. Good clean water does that. and it's free and you have to scrub a trough. And the amount people pay for things in bags that are going to do something that if we just manage water properly would do. This stuff is cream crackers. Like you go through cream crackers, these high performing dairy cows, admittedly these are the close up drives, so they're not particularly doing huge amounts of that. They'll need 150, 200 litres of water a day. If it's not palatable, you don't drink it, you don't eat the rest of it. So things like nutrition are mega factors in fertility. What else? What other bits? I'm sure you guys know more than just nutrition as a factor in fertility. Cubicles. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A bit more about cubicles. What are you meaning? I agree with you. Yeah, so we've just got actual stocking densities. Competition is a massive release of stress hormones. Stress hormones inhibit every single one of the hormones we're going to talk about in a few minutes. They stop them. Because when you are stressed, when you are competing, breeding is not on your list of things to do. If you're just brawling around in fear for your life, reproduction's not top of the list, like biologically. So there's that. There's also the cubicles. Are they comfortable enough? Have we actually got cubicles where cows want to lie down? Cows make 145% of the milk when they're lying down compared to when they're standing up. For every additional hour of lying time, you get a litre of milk. What's interesting actually is it used to be that milk production, higher milk production, people thought conception rates disappeared. But actually nowadays the data is showing that higher milk production is an indicator of good health and we get better conception rates. Some of the best conception rates I deal with are in 14,000 litre herds. Which you'd think, oh, that can't be it there. They're at the max of it. But they're at 14,000 because we've got comfy beds, we've got good feed access, which means they can maintain, perform. What else? Quick fire some more at me. Feet, yeah. So we've got the feet in terms of, you're not going to see it bulling, it's not going to stand there. I'm not going to stand there for someone to jump on my back if my leg hurts, simply put. We're always talking about heat detection. But then the case of inflammation, so inflammation on a general level, so that could be foot health, it could be mastitis, it could be respiratory health, BVD, leaky gut syndrome and all those things. All those inflammatory hormones block reproductive processes. Again, what we talk about is we talk about compartmentalization of energy in cows. They direct it in the most critical bits. Reproduction is way down that chain. When you've got a cow that's just got inflammation in a really generic term, it's probably utilizing about 2 kilos of glucose a day, which works out about 3 or 4 litres of milk a day that go away from milk production just into managing inflammation. So the reality is, and I said at the beginning, all this repro stuff is easy as hell if you've got the cows in the right place before you start it, and hard as hell if you haven't. You will always be chasing. However, we're going to talk about the repro cycle, because I also think it's worth talking about the hormones that we're actually using and understanding why we might do what we do and why we might not do what we do. Because I appreciate you guys have to know a lot. You have to be agronomists, vets, mechanics, feeding technicians. All these things you have to do. So I don't expect you to remember all this bit, but this is a bit of an opportunity for you to ask some questions when you get the chance. So, my first question for you guys, what's the normal cycle length of a cow? It's not a trick, actually, you'll be pleased to know. You guys will know this one. Fire it out. I won't look. Come on. Yeah, so 18 to 24 days is the typical. And it's interesting, actually, because 21 days used to be the real classic, and a lot of the performance metrics people use are 21-day preg rate, 21-day submission rates and stuff. But Holsteins tend to be 22, 23 nowadays. Now we've got heat detection collars and hundreds of thousands of heats to look at. It's a little bit longer in those things. So we're going to start by going through a bit of a cycle on day 0, which is ovulation of the last ovulation, basically. And this is a normal cycling cow that's not pregnant. Before we get on to the actual what happens on the ovaries, it's important to note that every single egg that cow has in its ovaries, they are born with. They develop when they're in the dam. Which is interesting because all the work at the minute, there's quite a lot of research at the moment that's showing that what we do with the dam affects the daughters and the daughters' fertility significantly. So there's a recent paper about heat stress in dry cows having an effect on the granddaughter's lifetime production. which is madness, isn't it? You think you might slip up once or twice. We've actually got multiple years of problems. And the reason that is because of epigenetics. We're all born with a bank of DNA. We've all got DNA. We've all got the genes that we've got. But depending on the circumstances and the environment that we're in, we turn some of those genes on and we turn some of them off. If we're going to get born into a harder environment with stress, we'll turn off some of the productivity genes. So we have significantly long impacts. So if you're ever looking into it, epigenetics is almost a scary topic in terms of what we do and the longevity of the effects that it has. But so these eggs are all in the ovary to start with, but they get a little signal a number of days before they even start cycling, before they're even part of it. Those little eggs, those oocytes get turned on. How many days is it? Does anyone know? I don't expect you to know this one. How many days is it between the initial signal and actually that egg properly ovulating? Anyone want to guess? You can throw some wild numbers out there.
Yeah.
Oh. So if we go for 4 times that, it's 60 days. Like 60 days from the initial signal to start before we get into all the ovulation side of it. Which means your eggs that are getting programmed to be released in 60 days, the ones we're trying to really nail at that first service, that real success at 60 days in milk, are getting those signals right around calving. Which is why transition health and transition management is massively important, because the quality of the signals that those oocytes get is really important. If we're in a period of stress, it changes the receptor pathways and all those things that influence the egg quality when it actually ovulates. So if we're seeing situations at 60 days where we're getting cystic cows, we have to go all the way back 60 days to work out what the stresses are at that point onwards to see. So your transition health, you'll hear about transition health in other workshops and bits today, makes a phenomenal difference to just your egg quality at the time we get to it. And there's no shortcut to that. There's no like, oh, we messed up transition a bit, but we've really nailed after 3 weeks. There's no shortcut. You will all know better than I do that when you get a cow that gets up, gets going, milks well, not dirty, it's a much easier ride than when you just battle from day one. So after a little while, what we get is about 10 or so 1 or 2 millimeter things. And when we get into near the end of this, come and have a look and have a little feel of these. There are actually some gloves so you can have a look at the uterine tracts we've got on the table. But we've got 10 or so follicles that become sensitive to a hormone called FSH, which is handily follicle stimulating hormone. It stimulates the follicles. It's good. It's what we get it in bottles as well. Use it in bottles. After a while, not all of those little follicles make it. So after a few days, some of those follicles start disappearing. And this is a period of a thing called selection. And so only some of them are successful. And they're still under FSH at this time. But one of these follicles, or 2, most twins in cows are actually double ovulations as opposed to an egg splitting, it gets the ability to produce its own hormones. They actually become self-sufficient. And so they can generate all the hormones they need to mature. They not only do that, but they suppress the ones around them, so they dominate them. They're just like, right, I'm the follicle here, you, out, gone. However, in this first wave, there's another structure on the ovary at the same time. What other structures do you get on ovaries other than follicles? What have you heard read out in these things? Shout it out. I believe in you. Written there if anyone wants to shout it and get the glory points. So many of you will be familiar, you've heard Pete the scanner man or the vet shout the CL on that ovary, everything like that. A CL is actually from the remnants of the previous ovulatory follicle, and the CL's job is it produces progesterone. Progesterone's single job as a hormone is to maintain pregnancy. Progestation, progesterone. And so the CL is like actively trying to prepare the uterus to receive a calf and maintain a calf if it gets it. What progesterone does though is progesterone suppresses all this activity because you don't want cycling really, you don't want ovulations and stuff when you're pregnant. We want to stop that. So progesterone puts the brakes on the rest of the cycle. So what happens with this egg, this follicle, is it actually disappears. It actually just starts going down. And it never ovulates. But about that time, we start another follicular wave. And cows are 2 follicular wave animals, so they have 2 waves. Adult cows have 2 waves in each cycle, whereas heifers are actually 3 waves, which is why we often use shorter sync programs with them. I don't know if anyone uses 5-day syncs in heifers and 7 days in cows. It's because of the length of the follicular wave that we're working with. At about day 15 or 16 in the cycle, what we get is the uterus and the uterine lining start sending a little signal to say there's no calf here. There's no calf here. We need to recycle again to get pregnant. Like, clear out the lining, clear out the lot, we need to go again. That signal is another hormone that you can get in a bottle. It's called prostaglandin, or estromate, or cyclics, or prelim, I don't know whatever you all use. But what that hormone does is it goes from the uterine lining to the ovary, which is quite close, you'll see, and it gets rid of the CL. What prostaglandin does is it gets rid of a CL. And what that does is it drops the progesterone quite quickly. And the drop of progesterone is like removing the brakes off the whole system. It removes all the inhibition that's stopping and slowing things down. And so this follicle that's been maturing in the meantime suddenly doesn't have the brakes on it anymore. And we end up with a second hormone. And like I say, there's a reason why I'm explaining this in detail. You might be like, wow, I don't want to remember all of this. But a second hormone called luteinizing hormone, LH, is released in tiny, little, very regular spikes. And so most hormones climb for a while and stay there and then drop. LH actually is all about pulsatile release. And for ovulation, we actually need LH spikes between 20 and 30 minutes at very precise concentrations to cause ovulation. And it is, like, when you read about it and stuff like that, it's amazing we get any ovulations anyway, because it's so precise that it's just ticking along, just one by one. So it's real precise and really easy to upset. The LH causes that ovulation to happen. The egg comes out of the follicle, goes down to the uterus, hopefully you've served the cow as well, and then we should hopefully get conception. We probably get conception a lot more times than we realise, but then we've obviously got the job of that little conceptus shouting loud enough to the uterine wall to say, I'm here, do not get rid of me. And if you've got situations where we've got damage to uterine walls, like metritis or endometritis, or we've got inflammation, those signals are just drowned out. So it's estimated that actually conception happens almost 90% of the time in cows, but they don't manage to recognise that pregnancy, which is quite something, isn't it? So all the things that we can do to remove those signals that say, stop, are good things to do. So what hormones, what you've got in your little cupboard for when you're managing fertility, what are the products you've got in bottles and bags? Come on, I believe in you guys. You've used them.
Estromate?
Yeah. So we've got estromate, or like I say, cyclics, prelim, luteinase. Yeah. So they are prostaglandins. Yeah. What else have we got? Receptor. Acegon, Ovarelin. Don't know if anyone of you using those ones. I go through the brand names that I can remember. Estromate's quite funny actually, because estromate is one of those situations where I've used the term estromate for lots and lots of years. I've never used the drug because it was superseded by cheaper options. So it's like Hoovers and stuff. Everyone talks about Hoover, but nobody uses the brand Hoover. So Receptal or Ovarelin and things, they are called a hormone called GnRH, which is gonadotrophin releasing hormone. And so GnRH actually causes the release of 2 other hormones, FSH and LH. And if you think of an off-sync cycle, one of those time-day-I programs, how many of you, quick show of hands, use the sync program, use a time-day-I program? Many of you? A few? Yeah. So when you're given that first receptor, that first GnRH jab, we're really aiming for this product. We're trying to stimulate that follicular wave. When you're given that final jab, we want this component, the LH, to get those spikes, to give it a real big spike to cause the ovulation at a fixed time, and then we can actually do it. Obviously, the middle jab is the prostaglandin, because at some point in that process we need to get rid of the CL, because if the CL's still there, she's not going to ovulate. So you can see why we do what we do in that situation. What's the other thing that you sometimes use? So we've got frost, we've got GnRH. Anything else? Comes in a bag, not a bottle. Put them in. Yeah, so cedars and prids. So cedars and prids, they've got me a small whiteboard because, I don't know, they were probably trying to make me bend down a little bit. But cedars and prids are progesterone, basically. They, what they do is they mimic a CL. It's like putting a CL into a cow. So what we get when we've got progesterone in play is we actually stop the cycle effectively. You don't see cows bulling with cedars in and stuff. But where they work is when you pull them out. Because if you think about when we get rid of a CL, we drop that progesterone concentration. It takes the brakes off the rest of the cycle. So what we're doing with a cedar or a prid is putting it in, pulling it out. That's when we're doing it. That's the removal of the progesterone that removes the brakes. So that's those bits. So like at the very end and stuff, because there's so many of you, come and have a look at the little ovaries and the structures on it. But when we're actually talking about the scanning side of things, we'll see in just a moment. You want one of those for a snack? You can have it. I've got 4, so you can put one in your pocket. How do you like them cooked? So these are some of the structures in terms of the scanning. This is an ovary itself there. Each of these grid squares, if you can see it, and like I say at the end, if you've got questions or you want to come and have a look, feel free. That's a follicle. That's a dominant follicle up there. So that's that side. Here is a big CL. And this is a follicle on the edge of it. And that follicle isn't going to ovulate because of the CL. So that's an atresia one. You see how it loses its roundness appearance? It loses its turidity and it just sort of dissolves away. Interestingly, like the use of ultrasound is really important in repro management, because even the very best operators can only tell what's on an ovary with their hands about 60% of the time. Some of these CLs are massive, and you'll see they're actually big lumpy things on here. There you go. I don't know if anyone can see that. There's a big lump there. And that's a CL, and you can feel that quite easily when you rectal a cow. But quite a lot of CLs are also internal, so people get it wrong and they miss what's what. But it's really important to know what structures are there, because we need to know what we can actually work with. Like each of those hormones are naturally occurring and they have a job. But so often lots of our fertility programs are doing that. What have we got here? Anyone want to shout out? This is a cross section of a uterus here with some fluid in it and something else in it. What is it? It's something we'd like to see. It's a calf. So that's actually a calf that's, I can't actually pause this annoyingly, like it's a nice live video, because often, obviously with ultrasound, you're always cross-sectioning things, so it's really hard to get the full picture, you sort of have to go over it. But this is a calf that's probably about 46, 47 days. You can start to see the head ends up here, and then the body comes in, there's the body and the back end there. So that's what we're hoping to see when we're scanning cows. This is quite dark. It's come out a bit darker than I'd like, but actually this little circle within that grainy mess is a 30-day calf. And so that's only a centimetre in size, and we're looking for a fetal heartbeat on that. It's interesting actually, because you get a fair rate of loss between scanning at 28 days to 32 days. So sometimes scanning things super early doesn't actually help you because the rate of loss is higher. Someone getting involved? So this is an ovary, and we talked about this structure a little while ago. Each of those squares is a centimetre. What is it? Anyone want to guess what that is? I expect you've probably not seen this before. So it's an ovary, so that's a cyst. That's what we talk about when we talk about a follicular cyst. So the definition, and again, there's a test at the end, so remember all this bit. A cyst is a thin-walled, fluid-filled structure above 30 millimetres that exists on the ovary in the absence of a CL on that ovary or the contralateral ovary for more than 10 days. So you don't need to really remember that. But a cyst is a failed ovulation, effectively. A cyst is basically the evidence that the signalling pathway was broken somewhere. It doesn't actually tell you where it broke, but somewhere on this journey, It didn't happen. It didn't go. Most of the time, it's that these LH spikes and pulses weren't appropriate. They weren't right. They were either too long separated or two things. And these dominant follicles, they can produce all the food and stuff that they need. So what they do is they just get bigger and they suppress all the activity on the ovary surrounding it, which is why these cystic cows are not seen bullers often. The other thing you sometimes get, instead of not seen bullers, you sometimes get cows with irregular heat intervals. And that's because the follicle's job when it comes to dominance is to start producing estrogen, which gives you all the display signs of estrus, of standing heats. And so some of these cysts will actually be producing lots of estrogen, which means that those cows look like they're coming bulling repeatedly at short intervals. They've got that behaviour, and it's like, oh, well, I served her 5 days ago and she's on heat again. What's gone on here? It's that we've still got that structure there. So when we're looking at cysts, what do you guys do to treat cysts? What have you got? If you get a cystic cow? Anyone? Sorry? So one of the things in terms of like that you want to avoid is manual bursting cysts is really not good for ovaries. Like people popping cysts in their hands has been proven to really upset future ovulations because we introduce scar tissue onto the things. We look at, there's no cysts here sadly, but when you look how thin-walled the follicle is, the pressure that we need to pop it is still actually quite high, that if you've got scar tissue over, you just never pop it. So the two options we tend to see is we tend to see either a double dose of GnRH, a big dose, which hopefully gives us this massive spike of LH, or we'll use progesterone for a while and then we'll pull it out. So nothing happens to that cyst when the progesterone's in there. It's when you pull it out, you remove the brakes, you get a really sharp fall in progesterone concentration, and then you get a rebound in these hormones. So that's what we generally do, and I would actually treat a lot of cystic cows with sync programs, because you do, annoyingly in some ways, but it's amazing in others, that we actually do get a reasonable amount of pregnancies on good synchronization programs on cystic cows, and that we just class them as a bonus. The whole job of synchronizing it is actually just to get a normal cycle next time, but if you get it, great. We've got probably conception rates 25% or so. It's not amazing, but it's better than nothing.
Bother them on that heat?
Sorry? Yeah. I wouldn't use someone expensive, but like with a sync program with a timed AI, you've guaranteed at that timed AI that you might as well, to be honest. You might as well. And like I say, on most of the herds I'm tracking it on, we're succeeding 1 in 4 times with a cedar sync on assist, which is much better than waiting, doing the GnRH, waiting for a bit, seeing if it's worked, and going again. So we've got some options there, but really if you just end up focusing on the treatment side, we don't get anywhere in terms of the resolution. We don't get to the root cause of the problem. This is not a failure of fertility. This is the symptom of something else being wrong in the system. And this is why it's so important that we track these things and how often they're happening, what groups of cows they're happening, because we can go back. Like I say, when you've got the vet or the scanner around our farm, they're not actually delivering you value, they're just reading results. We need to spend that time to go back and go, why is this? With your nutrition team, with your advisory team, with the farm team quite a lot of the time. A lot of the answers are always there on the farm, but we have to look. A couple of little things, but then there's some little time for questions and stuff. The sun's going to come out now. So this is beautiful clear fluid in a uterus here as it goes through. This is cloudy, horrible stuff. What do you think of that cow? What's wrong with her? She's dirty. Yeah, she's dirty. And so, like, that's pus in the uterus. It's all cloudy, snowstormy stuff. And so that would be whites in this case. And if you think of all the signals that have to happen from the uterus communicating with the ovary, if we've got all that pus, inflammation and damage to that uterine lining, it takes a real long time to get those signaling pathways back together. If you look at the concentrations of these hormones, they are so tiny. Because if you've got a conceptus, which is at 6 cells by the time, or 8 cells, sorry, by the time it's starting to reach the uterus, that's having to send enough hormone to be picked up by the lining and then the ovary to stop it. Any noise in that situation is not heard, which is why that conception to actually implantation is such a big loss figure for everything.
What's the best treatment for whites then?
The best treatment for whites is make sure you're addressing why you're getting the whites. There's a couple of controversial answers here, but I'm quite happy with that. Like, if you've got a good CL, the best thing you can do is actually bring them bulling. Because when you bring a cow bulling, you get all that tone, you get that slime, you get flushing of the uterus, everything comes through, and we get a changeover of that uterine lining as well. If you've not got that, most people would be using washouts like the Metricure washouts. There are quite a few herds I've worked with where we had an inordinate amount of whites at 21 days, so the actual thing that we did was just stop checking them until 28 days, and a lot of them disappeared, and we really dropped how many cows we were treating. The big thing we did when we moved it up to 28 days was we made sure they were doing a good fresh cow check. So at 4 to 7 days, they were looking at cows that had difficult calvings, had a bit of a raunch, were dehydrated, were empty, and treating anything then. And that really does make an impact of it. The problem is if you're finding whites at 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, is you're a good few cycles before you've got a healthy uterus again. Sometimes we're in these situations and you find them and things like that, but it's really important to start dialing it back to why has this happened? Have I got subclinical hypocalcemia? Have I got big calves coming through because of a bull choice? Are the cows too fat? Or something like that. So it's making sure we're dealing with that. So that is me.